Hiya! Welcome to Sniper's Rest. Sniper's Rest is the last best rest stop in the here and there, the place between where you're coming from and where you're going. I am Sniper Shadow and I reside here, and Sniper's Rest is a guide and custodian to those who pass through here. I visit the world within the multiverse often, but I am always here to guide and care for travelers such as yourself that pass through the here and there. Welcome, my friend. I'm attempting fall recipes this week. Seasons aren't really a thing in the here and there, but that doesn't mean I can't enjoy the thought of picking pumpkins, the smell of spices, and cute and spooky decor, right? The spooky cookies and cinnamon rolls were a success. Oh, that mess? Those were supposed to be pastries with sugary filling inside. They failed spectacularly, my friend. Never mind, failure is an opportunity to perfect the process. Please take a rest here before continuing your journey. Today we continue A Journey to the Center of the Earth by Jules Verne. Last we left our daring explorers, they were heading across the sea, inside the Earth. Let's see what today brings them. Chapter 33. A Battle of Monsters. Saturday, August 15. The sea unbroken all round. No land in sight. The horizon seems extremely distant. My head is still stupefied with the vivid reality of my dream. My uncle has had no dreams, but he is out of temper. He examines the horizon all around with his glass, and folds his arms with an air of an injured man. I remark that Professor Lidenbrock has a tendency to relapse into an impatient mood, and I make a note of it in my log. All my dangers and sufferings were needed to strike a spark of human feeling out of him, but now that I am well, his nature has resumed its sway. And yet, what cause was there for anger? Is not the voyage prospering as favorably as possible under the circumstances? Is the raft not spinning along with marvelous speed? "You seem anxious, my uncle," I said, seeing him continually with his glass to his eye. "Anxious? No, not at all." Impatient, then?" "One might be, with less reason than now." "Yet we are going very fast." "What does that signify? I am not complaining that the rate is slow, but the sea is so wide." Then I remembered that the Professor, before starting, had estimated the length of this underground sea at 30 leagues. We had made 3 times the distance, yet the southern coast was still not in sight. "We are not descending as we ought to be," the Professor declares. "We are losing time, and the fact is, I have not come all this way to take a little sail upon a pond on a raft." He called this sea a pond, and our long voyage taking a little sail. "But," I remarked, "since we have followed the road that Skenarsum has shown us—" "That is just the question. Have we followed that road? Did Skenarsum meet this sheet of water? Did he cross it? Has not the stream that we followed led us altogether astray?" "At any rate, we cannot feel sorry to have come so far. This prospect is magnificent, and—" "But I don't care for prospects. I came with an object, and I mean to attain it. Therefore don't talk to me about views and prospects." I take this as my answer, and I leave the Professor to bite his lip with impatience. At 6 in the evening Hans asks for his wages, and his 3 rix dollars are counted out to him. Sunday, August 16. Nothing new. Weather unchanged. The wind freshens. On awakening, my first thought was to observe the intensity of the light. I was possessed with an appreciation lest the electric light should grow dim, or fail altogether, but there seemed no reason to fear. The shadow of the raft was clear outlined upon the surface of the waves. Truly this sea is of infinite width. It must be as wide as the Mediterranean or the Atlantic. And why not? My uncle took soundings several times. He tied the heaviest of our pickaxes to a long rope which he let down 200 fathoms. No bottom yet, and we had some difficulty hauling up our plummet. But when the pick was shipped again, Hans pointed out on its surface deep prints as if it had been violently compressed between two hard bodies. I looked at the hunter. "Tender," said he. I could not understand him, and I turned to my uncle, who was entirely absorbed in his calculations. I had rather not disturb him when he is quiet. I returned to the Icelander. He, by a snapping motion of jaws, conveyed his ideas to me. "Teeth!" I cried, considering the iron bar with more attention. "Yes, indeed, those are the marks of teeth imprinted on the metal. The jaws which they arm must be possessed of amazing strength. Is there some monster beneath us, belonging to the extinct races, more vicarious than the shark, more fearful in vastness than the whale? I could not take my eyes off this intended iron bar. Surely will my night's dream be realized?" These thoughts agitated me all day, and my imagination scarcely calmed down after several hours of sleep. Monday, August 17. I am trying to recall the peculiar instincts of the monster of the pre-Adamite world, who, coming next in succession after the mollusks, the crustaceans, and the fishes, preceded the animal of mammalian race upon the earth. The world then belonged to reptiles. Those monsters held the mastery of the seas of the second period. They possessed a perfect organization, gigantic proportions, prodigious strength. The saurians of our day, the alligators and the crocodiles, are but feeble reproductions of their forefathers of the primitive ages. I shudder as I recall these monsters to my remembrance. No human eye had ever beheld them living. They burdened this earth thousands of ages before man appeared, but their fossil remains, found in argillous limestone, called by the English lias, have enabled their colossal structure to be perfectly built upon and anatomically ascertained. I saw at the Hamburg Museum the skeleton of one of these creatures, 30 feet in length. Am I then fated, I, a denizen of earth, to be placed face to face with these representatives of long extinct families? No, surely it cannot be. Yet the deep marks of the conical teeth upon the iron pick are certainly those of the crocodile. My eyes are fearfully bent upon the sea. I dread to see one of these monsters darting forth from the submarine caverns. I suppose Professor Lidenbrock was of my opinion too, and even shared my fears, for after having examined the pick, his eyes traversed the ocean from side to side. What a very bad notion that was of his, I thought to myself. Take surroundings just here. He had disturbed some monstrous beast in the remote den, and if we are not attacked on our voyage. I looked at our guns and see that they are all right. My uncle notices it, and looks on approvingly. Already widely disturbed regions on the surface of the water indicate some commotion below. The danger is approaching. We must be on the lookout. Tuesday, August 18. Evening came, or rather the time came when sleep weighs down the weary eyelids, for there is no night here, and the ceaseless light wearies the eyes with its persistency, just as if we were sailing under the Arctic sun. Hans was at the helm. During his watch I slept. 2 hours afterwards a terrible shock awoke me. The raft was heaved up on a watery mountain and pitched down again, and a distance of 20 fathoms. "What is the matter?" shouted my uncle. "Have we struck land?" Hans pointed with his finger at a dark mass 600 yards away, rising and falling alternately with heavy plunges. I looked and cried, "It is an enormous porpoise!" "Yes," replied my uncle, "and there is a sea lizard of vast size." "And farther on a monstrous crocodile. Look at its vast jaws and rows of teeth. It is diving down." "There is a whale, a whale!" cried the professor. "I can see its great fins. See how he is throwing out air and water through his blowers." And in fact, two liquid columns were rising to a considerable height above the sea. We stood amazed, thunderstruck, at the presence of such a herd of marine monsters. They were of supernatural dimensions. The smallest of them would have crunched our raft. crew and all, in one snap of its huge jaws. Hans wants to tack to get away from this dangerous neighborhood, but he sees, on the other hand, enemies not less terrible, a tortoise 40 feet long, and a serpent of 30, lifting its fearful head and gleaming eyes above the flood. Flight was out of the question now. The reptiles rose. They wheeled around our little raft with rapidity greater than that of express trains. They described around us a gradually narrowing circle. I took up my rifle. But what could a ball do against scaly armor with which enormous beasts were clad? We stood dumb with fear. They approached us close, on one side the crocodile, on the other the serpent. The remainder of the sea monsters have disappeared. I prepare to fire. Hans stops me with a gesture. The two monsters pass within 150 feet of our raft, and hurl themselves upon the other, with a fury which prevents them from seeing us. At 300 yards from us the battle was fought. We could distinctly observe the two monsters engaged in deadly conflict, but now it seems to me as if the animals were taking part in the fray, the porpoise, the whale, the lizard, the tortoise. Every moment I seem to see one or other of them. I point them to the Icelander. He shakes his head negatively. "Tva," says he. "What two? What does he mean there are only two animals?" "He is right," said my uncle, whose glass never left his eye. "Surely you must be mistaken," I cried. "No. The first of those monsters has a porpoise snout, a lizard's head, and crocodile's teeth, hence our mistake. It is an ichthyosaurus, the fish lizard, the most terrible of ancient monsters of the deep." "And the other?" "The other is a plesiosaurus, almost lizard, a serpent, armored with the carapace and saddles of a turtle. He is dreadful enemy of the other." Hans had spoken truly. Two monsters were only creating all this commotion. Before my eyes are two reptiles of the primitive world. I can distinguish the eye of the ichthyosaurus glowing like a red-hot coal, as large as a man's head. Nature has endowed it with optical apparatus of extreme power, and capable of resisting the pressure of great volume of water in the depth of its habits. It had been approximately called the Saurian whale for its both the swiftness and the rapid movement of the monster of our own day. This one was not less than 100 feet long, and I can judge of its size when it sweeps over the water the vertical coils of its tail. Its jaws is enormous, and according to naturalists it is armed with no less than 182 teeth. The plesiosaurus, a serpent with a cylindrical body and a short tail, has four flappers or paddles to act like oars. Its body, entirely covered with thick armor of scales, and its neck, as flexible as a swan's, rises 30 feet above the waves. Those two huge creatures attacked each other with greatest animosity. They heaved around them the liquid mountains, which rolled even after our raft and rocked it perilously. 20 times we were near capsizing. Hissing of prodigious force are heard. The two beasts are fast locked together. I cannot distinguish the one from the other. The probable rage of the conqueror inspires us with intense fear. 1 hour, 2 hours pass away. The struggle continues with unabated ferocity. The combatants alternately approach and recede from our raft. We remain motionless, ready to fire. Suddenly the ichthyosaurus and the plesiosaurus disappear below, leaving a whirlpool eddying in the water. Several minutes pass by, while the fight goes on under water, and all at once an enormous head is darted up, the head of the plesiosaurus. The monster is wounded to death. I can no longer see his scaly armor. Only his long neck shoots up, drops again, coils and uncoils, droops, lashes in the water like a gigantic whip, and writhes like a worm that you tread on. The water is splashed for a long way around. The spray almost blinds us, but soon the reptile's agony draws to an end. Its movements become fainter, and its contortions cease to be so violent, and the long serpentine form lies lifeless, a log, on the labouring deep. As for the Ichthyosaurus, has he returned to his submarine cavern, or will he reappear on the surface of the sea? Chapter 34. The Great Geyser. Wednesday, August 19. Fortunately, the wind blows violently and has enabled us to flee from the scene of the late terrible struggle. Hans keeps at his post at the helm. My uncle, whom the absorbing incidents of the combat had drawn away from his contemplations, began again to look around himself impatiently. The voyage resumes in its uniform tenor, which I don't care to break with a repetition of such events as yesterday's. Thursday, August 20. Wind north-northeast, unsteady and fitful. Temperature high. Rate 3½ leagues an hour. At about noon, a distant noise is heard. I note the fact without being able to explain it. It is a continuous roar. "In the distance," says the professor, "there is a rock or islet against which the sea is breaking." Hans climbs up the mast, but sees no breaker. The ocean is smooth and unbroken to its farthest limit. 3 hours pass away. The roaring seems to proceed from a very distant waterfall. I remark upon this to my uncle, who replies doubtfully, "Yes, I am convinced that I am right." Are we, then, speeding forward to some cataract which will cast us down an abyss? This method of getting on may please the professor because it is vertical, but for my part I prefer the more ordinary modes of horizontal progression. At any rate, some leagues to the windward there must be some noisy phenomenon, for now the roaring are heard with increasing loudness. Do they proceed from the sky or the ocean? I look up to the atmospheric vapours and try to fathom their depths. The sky is calm and motionless. The clouds have reached the utmost limit of the lofty vault, and there lie still bathed in the bright glare of the electric light. It is not there that we must seek for the cause of this phenomenon. Then I examine the horizon, which is unbroken and clear of all mist. There is no change in its aspect, but if this noise arises from a fall, a cataract, if all this ocean flows away headlong into a lower basin, yet if that deafening roar is produced by a mass of falling water, the current must need to accelerate, and its increasing speed will give me the measure of the peril that threatens us. I consult the current, but there is none. I throw an empty bottle into the sea. It lies still. About 4, Hans rises, lays hold of the mast, climbs to its top. Thence his eye sweeps the large area of sea, and is fixed upon a point. His countenance exhibits no surprise, but his eyes are immovably steady. "He sees something," says my uncle. I believe he does. Hans comes down, then stretches his arm to the south, saying, "Der near." "Down there," repeated my uncle. Then, seizing his glass, he gazes attentively for a minute, which seems to me an age. "Yes, yes," he cried. "I see a vast inverted cone rising from the surface." "Is it another sea beast?" "Perhaps it is." "Then let us steer farther westward, for we know something of the danger of coming across those monsters of that sort." "Let us go straight on," replied my uncle. I appealed to Hans. He maintained his course inflexibly. Yet, if at our present distance from the animal, a distance of 12 leagues at the least, the column of water driven down through its blower may be distinctly seen, it must needs be of vast size. The commonest prudence would counsel immediate flight, but we did not come so far to be prudent. Imprudently, therefore, we pursue our way. The nearer we approach, the higher mounts the jet of water. What monster can possibly fill itself with such a quantity of water and spurt it up so continuously? At 8 in the evening, we are not 2 leagues distant from it. Its body, dusky, enormous, hillocky, lies spread upon the sea like an islet. Is it an illusion or fear? Its length seems to me a couple of 1,000 yards. What can this be, this crustacean, which neither Kervure nor Blumenbach knew anything about? It lies motionless, as if asleep. The sea seems unable to move it in the least. It is the waves that undulate upon its side. The column of water thrown up at a height of 500 feet falls in rain with a deafening roar. And here we are, scudding like lunatics before the wind to get near to a monster that 100 whales a day would not satisfy. Terror seizes upon me. I refuse to go further. I will cut the halids if necessary. I am open to mutiny against the professor, who vouchsafes no answer. Suddenly, Hans rises, and pointing with his finger at the menacing object, he says, "Holm." "An island!" cries my uncle. "That's not an island!" I cried sceptically. "It is nothing else!" shouted the professor, with a loud laugh. "But that column of water—" "Geyser," said Hans. "No doubt it is a geyser, like those in Ireland." At first I protested against being so widely mistaken as to have taken an island for a marine monster. But the evidence is against me, and I have to confess my error. It is nothing worse than a natural phenomenon. As we approach nearer, the dimensions of the liquid column become magnificent. The islet resembles, with a most deceiving likeness, an enormous crustacean, whose head dominates the waves at the height of 20 yards. The geyser, a word meaning fury, rises majestically from its extremity. Deep and heavy explosions are heard from time to time, when the enormous jet, possessed with more furious violence, shakes its plumy crest, and springs with a bound till it reaches the lowest stratum of the clouds. It stands alone. No steam nymphs, no hot springs surround it, and all the volcanic power of this region is concentrated here. Sparks of electric fire mingle with dazzled sheafs of lighted fluid, every drop of which refracts the prismatic colors. "Let us land," said the professor. "But we must carefully avoid this water-spout, which would sink our raft in a moment." Hans, steering with his usual skill, brought us to the other extremity of the islet. I leapt up on the rock. My uncle followed lightly, while our hunter remained at his post, like a man too wise to ever be astonished. We walked upon granite mingled with siliceous tufa. The soil shivers and shakes under our feet, like the sides of an overheated boiler, filled with steam struggling to get loose. We come in sight of a small central basin, out of which the geyser springs. I plunge a register thermometer into the boiling water. It marks an intense heat of 325 degrees, which is far above the boiling point. Therefore this water issues from an ardent furnace, which is not only at all in harmony with Professor Lidenbrock's theories. I cannot help making the remark. "Well," he replied, "how does that make against my doctrine?" "Oh, nothing at all," I said, seeing I was going in opposition to an immovable obstinacy, "since I am constrained to confess that hitherto we have been wonderfully favored, and for some reason, unknown to myself, we have accomplished our journey under singularly favorable conditions of temperature. But it seems to me to manifest that some day we shall reach a region where the central heat attains its highest limits, and goes beyond a point that can be registered by our thermometers." "That is what we will see," so says the professor, who, having named this volcanic islet after his nephew, gives the signal to embark again. For some minutes I am still contemplating the geyser. I notice that it throws up its column of water with variable force, sometimes sending it to a greater height, then again to a lower, which I attribute to the variable pressure of the steam accumulated in its reservoir. At last we leave the island, rounding away past the low rocks on its southern shore. Hans has taken advantage of the halt to refit his rudder. But before going on any further, I make a few observations to calculate the distance we have gone over, and note them in my journal. We have crossed 270 leagues of sea since leaving Port Gräuben,
and we are 620 leagues from Iceland, under England.
Chapter 34. An Electric Storm. Friday, August 21. On the morrow, the magnificent geyser has disappeared. The wind has risen and has rapidly carried us away from Axel Island. The roaring become lost in the distance. The weather, if we may use that term, will change before long. The atmosphere is charged with vapors, pervaded with the electricity generated by the evaporation of saline waters. The clouds are sinking lower and assume an olive hue. The electric light can scarcely penetrate through these dense curtains, which have dropped over the theatre on which the battle of elements was about to be waged. I feel peculiar sensations, like many creatures on earth, at the approach of a violent atmospheric change. The heavily voluted cumulus clouds lower gloomily and threateningly. They wear that implacable look which I have sometimes noticed at the outbreak of a great storm. The air is heavy, and the sea is calm. In the distance, the clouds resemble great bales of cotton piled up in picturesque disorder. By degrees they dilate and gain in huge size what they lose in number. Such is their ponderous weight that they cannot rise from the horizon, but obeying an impulse from higher currents, their dense consistency slowly yields. The gloom upon them deepens, and they soon present to our view a ponderous mass of almost level surface. From time to time a fleecy tuft of mist, with yet some gleaming light left upon it, drops down upon the dense floor of grey, and loses itself in the opaque and impenetrable mass. The atmosphere is evidently charged and surcharged with electricity. My whole body is saturated. My hair bristles just as when you stand upon an insulated stool under the action of an electrical machine. It seems to me as if my companions, the moment they touched me, would receive a severe shock, like that from an electric eel. At 10 in the morning the symptoms of storm become aggravated. The wind never lulls but to acquire increased strength. The vast bank of heavy clouds as a huge reservoir of fearful windy gusts and rushing storms. I am loth to believe these atmospheric menaces, and yet I cannot help muttering, "Here's some very bad weather coming on." The professor made no answer. His temper is awful, to judge from the working of his features, as he sees this vast length of ocean unrolling before him in an indefinite extent. He can only spare time to shrug his shoulders viciously. "There's a heavy storm coming on," I cried, pointing towards the horizon. "Those clouds seem as if they are going to crush the sea." A deep silence falls on all around. The lately roaring winds are hushed into a dead calm. Nature seems to breathe no more, and to be sinking into the stillness of death. On the mast already I see the light play of a lambent St. Elmo's fire. The outstretched sail catches not a breath of wind, and hangs like a sheet of lead. The rudder stands motionless in a sluggish, waveless sea. But if we have now ceased to advance, why do we yet leave that sail loose, which at the first shock of tempest may capsize us in a moment? "Let us reef the sail and cut down the mast," I cried. "That will be safest." "No, never!" shouted my impetuous uncle. "Never, let the wind catch us if it will. What I want is to get the least glimpse of a rock or shore. Even our raft should be smashed into slivers." The words were hardly out of his mouth when a sudden change took place in the southern sky. The piled-up vapors condense into water, and the air, put into violent action to supply the vacuum left by the condensation of the mists, rouses itself into a whirlwind. It rushes on from the farthest recesses of the cavern. The darkness deepens. Scarcely I can jot down a few hurried notes. The helm makes a bound. My uncle falls full length. I creep close to him. He has laid a firm hold upon a rope,
and appears to watch with grim satisfaction this awful display of elemental strife. Hans stirs not, his long hair blown by the pelting storm, and laid flat across his immovable countenance, makes him a strange figure, for the end of each loose lock flowing hair is tipped with luminous radiations. This frightful mask of electric sparks suggests to me, even in this dizzy excitement, a comparison with preadamant man, the contemporary of the Ichthyosaurus and the Megatherium. The mast yet holds firm, the sail stretches tight, like a bubble ready to burst, and the raft flies at a rate that I cannot reckon, but not so fast as the foaming clouds of spray which dashes from side to side in its headlong speed. "The sail! The sail!" I cry, motioning to lower it. "No," replies my uncle. "Nedge," repeats Hans, leisurely shaking his head. But now the rain forms a rushing cataract in front of that horizon towards which we are running with such maddening speed. But before it has reached us the rain clouds part asunder, the sea boils, and the electric fires are brought into violent action by mighty chemical power that descends from higher regions. The most vivid flashes of lightning are mingled with the violent crash of continuous thunder. Ceaseless fiery arrows dart in and out among the flying thunderclouds. The vapor's mass soon glows with incandescent heat. Hailstones rattle fiercely down as they dash upon our iron tools. They too emit gleams of flashing, lurid light. The heaving waves resemble fiery volcanic hills, each belching forth its own interior flames, and every crest is plumed with dancing fire. My eyes fail under the dazzling light. My ears are stunned with the incessant crash of thunder. I must be bound to the mast, which bows like a reed for the mighty strength of the storm. Here my notes become vague and indistinct. I only have been able to find a few which I seem to have jotted down almost unconsciously. But their brevity and their obscurity reveal the intensity of the excitement which dominated me, and describe the actual position even better than my memory could do. Sunday 23. Where are we? Driven forward with a swiftness that cannot be measured. The night was fearful, no abatement of the storm. The din and uproar are incessant. Our ears are bleeding. To exchange a word is impossible. The lightning flashes with the intense brilliancy and never seems to cease for a moment. Zigzagging streams of bluish-white fire dash down upon the seas and rebound, and then take upward flight till they strike the granite vault that overarches our heads. Suppose that the solid roof should crumble down upon our heads. Other flashes with incessant play across their vivid fires, with other again roll themselves into balls of living fire which explode like bombshells, but the music of which scarcely adds to the din of the battle of strife that almost deprives us of our sense of hearing and sight. The limit of intense loudness has been passed within which the human ear can distinguish one sound from another. If all the powder magazines in the world were to explode at once, we should hear no more than we do now. From under the surface of the clouds there are continual emissions of lurid light. Electric matter, in continual evolution from their component molecules, the gaseous elements of air, need to be slaked with moisture, for innumerable columns of water rush upwards into the air and fall back again in white foam. Whither are we flying? My uncle lies full length across the raft. The heat increases. I refer the thermometer. It indicates the figure is obliterated. Monday, 24th of August. Will there be an end to it? Is the atmospheric condition, having once reached this density, to become final? We are prostrated and worn out with fatigue, but Hans is as usual. The raft bears on still to the southeast. We have made 200 leagues since we left Axel Island. At noon the violence of the storm redoubles. We are obliged to secure as fast as possible every article that belongs to our cargo. Each of us is lashed to some part of the raft. The waves rise above our heads. For 3 days we have never been able to make each other hear a single word. Our mouths open, our lips move, but not a word can be heard. We cannot even make ourselves heard by approaching our mouth close to the ear. My uncle has drawn nearer to me. He has uttered a few words. They seem to be, "We are lost, but I am not sure." At last I write down the words, "Let us lower the sail." He nods his consent. Scarcely has he lifted his head again before a ball of fire has bounded over the waves and lighted aboard our raft. The mast and sail flew up in an instant together, and I saw them carried up into prodigious height, resembling in appearance a pterodactyl, one of those strong birds of the infant world. We lay there, our blood running cold with unspeakable terror, the fireball, half of it white, half of azure blue, and the size of a 10-inch shell, moved slowly about the raft, but revoking its own axis with astonishing velocity, as if whipped around by the force of the whirlwind. Here it comes, there it glides, now it is up the ragged stump of the mast, thence it lightly leaps on the provision bag, descends with a bound, and just skims the powder magazine. Horrible! We shall be blown up, but no, the dazzling disk of mysterious light nimbly leaps aside. It approaches Hans, who fixes his blue eyes upon it steadily. It threatens the head of my uncle, who falls upon his knees with his head down to avoid it. And now my turn comes. Pale and trembling, under the blinding splendor and the melting heat, it drops at my feet, spinning silently around the deck. I try to move my foot away, but I cannot. A suffocating smell of nitrogen fills the air. It enters the throat, it fills the lungs. We suffer stifling pains. Why am I unable to move my foot? Is it riveted to the planks? Alas! The fall upon our fated raft of this electric globe has magnetized every iron article on board. The instruments, the tools, our guns are clashing and clanking violently in their collisions with each other. The nails of my boots cling tenaciously to the plate of iron that let into the timbers, and I cannot draw my foot away from the spot. At last, by a violent effort, I release myself, at the instant where the ball gyrations was about to seize upon and carry me off my feet. Ah, what a flood of intense, dazzling light! The globe has burst, and we are deluged with tongues of fire. Then all the light disappears. I could just see my uncle at full length on the raft, and Hans still at his helm, the spitting fire under the action of electricity which has saturated him. But where are we going to? Where? Tuesday, 25th of August. I recover from a long swoon. The storm continues to roar and rage. The lightnings dash hither and thither, like broods of fiery serpents filling the air. Are we still under the sea? Yes, we are borne at incalculable speed. We have been carried under England, under the Channel, under France, perhaps the whole of Europe. A fresh noise is heard. Surely it is the sea breaking upon the rocks. But then...
Chapter 36. Calm Philosophic Discussions. Here I end what I may call my log, happily saved from the wreck, and I resume my narrative as before. What happened when the raft was dashed upon the rocks is more than I can tell. I felt myself hurled into the waves, and if I escaped from death, and if my body was not torn over the sharp edges of the rocks, it was because of the powerful arms of Hans that came to my rescue. The brave Icelander carried me out of the reach of the waves, over a burning sand, where I found myself by the side of my uncle. He then returned to the rocks, against which the furious waves were beating, to save what he could. I was unable to speak. I was shattered with fatigue and excitement. I wanted a whole hour to recover, even a little. But a deluge of rain was still falling, though with that violence which generally denotes the near ceasing of a storm. A few overhanging rocks afforded us some shelter from the storm. Hans prepared some food, which I could not touch, and each of us, exhausted with 3 sleepless nights, fell into a broken and painful sleep. The next day the weather was splendid. The sky and the sea had sunk into sudden repose. Every trace of the awful storm had disappeared. The exhilarating voice of the professor fell on my ears as I awoke, and he was ominously cheerful.
"Well, my boy," he cried, "have you slept well?"
Would not anyone have thought that we were still in our little cheerful house on the Konstrasse, and that I was only just coming down to breakfast, and that I was to be married to Gräuben that day? Alas! If the tempest had but sent a little raft the little more east, we should have passed under Germany, under my beloved town of Hamburg, under the very street where dwelt all that I loved most in the world. Then only 40 leagues would have separated us, but the 40 leagues perpendicular of solid granite wall, and in reality we were 1,000 leagues asunder. All these painful reflections rapidly crossed my mind before I could answer my uncle's question.
"Well now," he repeated, "won't you tell me how you have slept?"
"Oh, very well," I said. "I am only a little knocked up, but soon I shall be better."
"Oh," said my uncle, "that's nothing to signify. You are only a little bit tired."
"But you, uncle, you seem in very good spirits this morning."
"Delighted, my boy, delighted. We have got there."
"To our journey's end?"
"No, but we have got to the end of the endless sea. Now we shall go by land, and really begin to go down, down, down."
"But, my dear uncle, do let me ask you one question."
"Of course, Axel."
"How about returning?"
"Returning? What are you talking about return before the arrival?"
"No, I only want to know how it will be managed."
"In the simplest way possible. When we have reached the centre of the globe, either we shall find some new way to get back, or we shall come back like the decent folks in the way we came. I feel pleased at the thought that it is sure to be shut against us."
"But then we shall have to refit the raft."
"Of course."
"Then as to provisions, we have enough to last?"
"Yes, to be sure we have. Hans is a clever fellow, and I am sure he must have saved a large part of our cargo. But still, let us go and make sure."
We left this grotto, which lay open to every wind. At the same time I cherished a trembling hope which was a fear as well. It seemed to me impossible that the terrible wreck of the raft should not have destroyed everything on board. On my arrival on the shore I found Hans surrounded by an assemblage of articles, all arranged in good order. My uncle shook hands with him with lively gratitude. This man was almost superhuman with devotion, had been at work all while that we were asleep, and had saved the most precious of articles at the risk of his life. Not that we had suffered no losses, for instance our firearms, but we might do without them. A stock of powder had remained uninjured after having risked blowing up during the storm.
"Well," Professor cried, "as we have no guns, we cannot hunt, that's all."
"Yes, but how about the instruments?"
"Here is the aneroid, the most useful of all, and for which I would have given all the others. By means of it I can calculate the depth, and know when we have reached the centre. Without it we might like very go beyond, and come out at the antipodes."
Such high spirits as these were rather too strong. "But where is the compass?"
"It is here upon this rock, in perfect condition, as well as the thermometers and the chronometer. The hunter is a splendid fellow."
There was no denying it. We had all our instruments. As for tools and appliances, there they all lay on the ground, ladders, ropes, picks, spades, etc. Still there was the question of the provisions to be settled, and I asked, "How are we off for provisions?" The box containing these were in a line upon the shore, in a perfect state of preservation. For the most part the sea had spared them, and what with biscuit, salt, meat, spirit, and salt fish, we might reckon on 4 months' supply.
"4 months!" cried the Professor. "We have time to go and to return, and with what's left I give a grand dinner to my friends at Jotunheim."
I ought to by this time have been quite accustomed to my uncle's ways, yet there was always something fresh about him to astonish me.
"Now," he said, "we will have our supplies of water, with the rain which the storm has left in all these granite basins. Therefore we shall have no reason to fear anything from thirst. As to the raft, I will recommend Hans to do his best to repair it, although I don't expect it will be of any further use to us."
"How so?" I cried.
An idea of my own, my lad. I don't think we shall come out by the way that we went in.
I stared at the Professor with a good deal of mistrust. I asked, was he not touched in the brain? And yet there was a method in his madness.
And now let us go to breakfast, said he.
I followed him to a headland, after he had given his instructions to the hunter. Their preserved meat, biscuits, and tea made us an excellent meal, one of the best I ever remember. Hunger, the fresh air, the calm quiet weather, and the commotions we had gone through all contributed to giving me a good appetite. Whilst breakfasting, I took the opportunity to put my uncle the question where we were now. It seems to me, I said, rather difficult to make out.
Yes, it is difficult, he said, to calculate exactly, perhaps even impossible, since during these 3 stormy days I have been unable to keep any account of the rate or direction of the raft, but we may get an approximation.
The last observation, I remarked, was made on the island, when the geyser was...
You mean Axel Island. Don't decline the honour of having given your name to the first island ever discovered in the central part of the globe.
Well, said I, let it be Axel Island. Then we had cleared 270 leagues of sea, and we were 600 leagues from Iceland.
Very well, answered my uncle. Let us start from that point, and count 4 days' storm, during which our rate cannot have been less than 80 leagues in 24 hours.
That's right. This would make 300 leagues or more.
Yes, and the Lidenbrock Sea would be 600 leagues from shore to shore. Surely, Axel, it may vie in size with the Mediterranean itself.
Exactly, I replied. If it happens that we've only crossed it in its narrowest part, it is a curious circumstance. I added, that if my computations are right, we are 900 leagues from Rovaniak. We have now the Mediterranean above our head.
That is a good long way, my friend, but whether we are under Turkey or the Atlantic depends very much upon the question in which direction we have been moving. Perhaps we have deviated.
No, I think not. Our course has been the same all along, and I believe this shore is southeast of Port Gräuben.
Well, replied my uncle, we may easily ascertain this by consulting the compass. Let us go and see what it says.
The Professor moved towards the rock upon which Hans had laid down the instruments. He was gay and full of spirits. He rubbed his hands and studied his attitudes. I followed him, curious to know if I was right in my estimate. As soon as we had arrived at the rock, my uncle took the compass, laid it horizontally, and questioned the needle, which, after a few oscillations, presently assumed a fixed position. My uncle looked, and looked, and looked again. He rubbed his eyes, then turned to me thunderstruck with some unexpected discovery. "What's the matter?" I asked. He motioned me to look. An exclamation of astonishment burst from me. The north pole of the needle was turned to what was supposed to be south. It pointed to the shore, instead of to the open sea. I shook the box and examined it again. It was in perfect condition. Whatever position I placed the box, the needle pertinaciously returned to this unexpected quarter. Therefore, there seemed to be no reason to doubt that during the storm there had been a sudden change of wind unperceived by us, which had brought our raft back to the shore which we thought we had left so long a distance behind us. That concludes our tale for this week, my friend. Please return next week and we will continue our journey through A Journey to the Center of the Earth by Jules Verne. If you wish to rest here some more, please find a space that suits you. Whether you curl up by the fire, partake in some food and beverages in our kitchen, take a nap in one of our many rooms, or take a stroll around the garden, please know you are always welcome at Sniper's Rest, my friend. If you are continuing your journey, the multiverse is a busy place today. Happy spooky season, my friend. To the north, you inherit an ancient house. As you explore, you begin to find family secrets and the workings workings of an insidious plan. A wonderful and dangerous adventure is about to begin. Are you ready? To the west, mankind tried to leave this world behind, but you've crashed on it. Survive this harsh, dark world filled with untold horrors. And remember, you are not alone. To the east, frightening dreams haunt Isabella at night, her past lost in a fog in her mind. A clue in one dream leads her and her fiancé to a terrifying ghost town. Find your way through the lost souls to reach the center of this spooky mystery. And if you are making your own way out there, good luck, my friend, wherever you end up, wherever you come from, and wherever you're going. Thank you for spending some time here with us at Sniper's Rest. Remember to take care of yourself, be kind to others, hydrate, take a moment to look out into the world, and marvel at how incredible it all is. How incredible you are, friend. Until next time, please take care on your way.